Hey Chumbas, how is it going? I would like to show you my WSL Debian setup and how I do it with everything you need to do it from the beginning to the end. I've documented everything on my GitHub page, so it's GitHub Glimmer, and there is this project here, WSL Debian setup. I don't want to bore you with all the details here, you can read it by yourself. So we jump right into installing the prerequisites on the Windows side. Obviously, there is also some stuff you need to do on the Linux side, but yeah, we need to start with Windows, obviously. The first thing you have to do is you have to make sure that 2 Windows features are installed. So let's look what those are. Go here, type in feature, and then select turn Windows features on or off. Let's do that. What you need here is Windows subsystem for Linux. That's probably obvious. And the other one is virtual machine platform. That's the feature you need to have to enable Hyper-V for WSL. So you don't need Hyper-V here. You see, I haven't selected it. WSL is based on Hyper-V, that's right, but Hyper-V is only available on the Pro and Enterprise versions of Windows. So there is this special feature here, the virtual machine platform, that enables the Hyper-V technology, not Hyper-V itself, but the Hyper-V technology also on home versions of Windows for WSL. So making a long story short, you need this one and this one. If you haven't selected them, select them and click OK. I have already done that because it needs a reboot and I don't want to interrupt my video here with a reboot. So let's assume you've done that. Next thing is you need to have a kernel installed, the Linux kernel installed. That's basically the regular Linux kernel, but it has some patches coming from Microsoft to make it compatible and everything with Windows, with WSL. Therefore, you need to download and install this kernel. So let's download it. And yep, we want to install it. That shouldn't take too long. Good. Having done that, next step is to install Debian. Also, this is not the regular Debian from the Debian website. You need to fetch it from the Microsoft Store. So we can go here, jump into the Microsoft Store, and yeah, we download it, we install it. Takes a couple of seconds. Okay, we don't need to launch it right now. Let's first continue with installing all the other items from the list here. The next thing is purely optional. That's the Windows Terminal from Microsoft. I would recommend it because I think it's a good application, having all the different terminals. Not too sure how to phrase it, but at the end you have the PowerShell, you have the old legacy command line tool, and you have all the WSL shells in one application. And as you see further down, there are a couple of handy configurations you can do with it. So making another long story short, obviously we have many long stories today. Let's download it from the Microsoft Store, install it, have a look at it. I would recommend it, but you don't need to use it. Okay, no need to start it right now. Let's continue our journey here. Docker, also obviously not necessary to use WSL, but as I said, this is my development environment. I would like to have Docker, so I'm going to install it here as well. We can close this and continue. The next program is Visual Studio Code. From my point of view, a fantastic editor. I would generally recommend it, but for WSL it is a bit more than the regular good. What I mean is, what you can do is you can edit files sitting on the Linux file system from this Windows application, and you don't need to go through the network share. So Microsoft has come up with a Linux background program which enables the Visual Studio Code on the Windows side to edit files. That's way more performant, super convenient, and as said, I mean, you don't need to do that, but if you're really interested in WSL, working with WSL and so on, from my point of view, this is the way to go. And as I said, generally, Visual Studio Code is a good editor. There is one thing we need to do, therefore we launch Visual Studio Code for now. We need to make sure that the Windows application has a plugin or an extension installed, and it's already here, remote WSL. If you don't see it, type it in here. I have it, and we need to install it. Okay, it was already installed for me, but if it's not installed for you, you need to install it. Okay, we have done that. We can close everything, close this one. Last but not least, what we need is an X11 server for Windows. I've tried a couple of them. Some of them are free of charge, some of them are not. This one, from my point of view, it is free of charge, and it's absolutely good. It never crashed for me, for example, so I would recommend it. It's VCXSRV. Let's go to the source. I mean, this is a bit confusing here that it's hosted on SourceForge, but anyway, it's good. I recommend it. Let's download it. Let's install it. Alrighty, good. That concludes our list of things we have to install in Windows, and we can continue to configure the various things. The first thing we want to do is we want to start the X11 server. So we go here, it's called Xlaunch, and we start it. The X11 server can be started in different ways, and the first question is, how should it behave in terms of Windows, this on the Windows side? So what we want to have is we want to have multiple windows, so each Linux application get its own windows on the Windows side. This is fantastic, and you will see it later why. Display number -1, that's perfectly fine. We don't need any of those here. Native OpenGL, I mean, you can run it with or without. It's a bit more complicated to run it with, so I would recommend to remove it. For me, it never made a difference whether this is checked or not. And we need to disable the access control. So check this one, uncheck this one, then click next and finish here. Good. Now here it is. The X11 server is started. I would also recommend to disable this one here. I mean, you probably know that Linux has not only a clipboard, it has also a primary selection. From my point of view, this doesn't work super well with Windows, so I would just remove it for now. Good. The next thing is we need to make sure that Debian, which we have already downloaded, is installed. So we go here, we type in Debian, and we start it once. Let's do that. It now installs the files we downloaded a couple of minutes ago, and it creates the system. So it asks for a user. I go for my name here and a somehow simple password or a complicated one, which you like. Good, it's installed, and we can close this window here. If you don't have Windows Terminal installed, you would probably need to use this one here, but as said, I like to use Windows Terminal because it combines all those different command line interfaces into one application. Good. Having done that, we can indeed start Windows Terminal. So we type in Windows Terminal here. Here it is. Let's start it. Windows Terminal starts with a PowerShell by default. We can configure that to start Debian automatically later on. For now, that's fine. We click here, and there it is, Debian. Okay, now we are inside the Debian VM. We are running WSL. This is it. Still, we want to configure it in a way. We want to have, for example, the possibility to start UI programs. So the first thing we want to do is maybe we want to change to our Linux home directory, because for whatever strange reason it always starts in the Windows home directory. I don't see a reason why you ever want that. So let's go to the Linux home directory, and we can also configure Windows Terminal later on, so it automatically starts in the Linux terminal. So we need to install things here. Let's go back to my GitHub project, and the first thing we want to do is we want to install wget, and I mean we also want to do an update here. Let's do that. Okay, so now we have more or less two possibilities. You can either execute a script I have written. This is this one here. It installs all the software, it configures fish, and so on and so on. We can do that step by step now, so we don't use the script in itself, but we will look a bit into the script. So the first thing we want to do is we want to install software here. So let's copy that out, but let's look at those things we want to install here before we execute the command. Okay, Git is Git, everyone knows that. TaskCell is a tool to install the GNOME setup in a couple of minutes. It's super handy, therefore we install this one. NetTools are the NetTools like Telnet and Ping and so on. Exa is a LS replacement I really like, therefore I want to install it. Okay, OpenJDK should be clear to everyone. Same goes with Maven or Gradle. Okay, we installed this one here already. I could remove it. Obviously, I forgot that. Chromium, yeah, is the browser. Curl, yeah, you probably also know Curl. A couple of development tools here we need for a node installation later on. JQ is a handy tool if you work with JSON. Fish is my preferred command line interpreter, my bash replacement, and Melt is a diff tool. Okay, let's install that. Perfect. So next step is, okay, in my script it configures fish. We don't do that right now. It also configures SSH. We don't do that. Another fish configuration. That's all nice and fine, but to do something manually, probably we won't do that. Okay, we already installed Java, but we also want to install Node.js. So let's go here. It's not too complicated. This installs the long-term support version of Node. Okay, from my point of view, this is also a super handy tool, therefore I always install it. That lets you inspect JOT tokens on the command line here. Okay, you could install IntelliJ, for example. We don't need to do that right now. Now we come to the more interesting things. We install the GNOME desktop. And as said, we do that via task cell because that's super handy. There is one thing you need to do during the process here. You need to select your keyboard layout. So don't run away. Somewhere in the middle it asks you for a keyboard layout. Okay, we are almost there. Having the GNOME desktop installed, that's fine. The last thing we want to do is, to change the shell from bash to fish. Good, now we can close this window and open it again, and we are back in fish. That's fine for me. As said, we are still in the Windows home directory, though let's change that to Linux. Now we need to make sure that the display and the path variable is properly set. If we check that, especially the path variable, you see, okay, no, that's fine, that's good. If it doesn't look like that, if it's very short, let's say only looking like the first 2 or 3, then you somehow need to make sure that you have all the right path variables set. But I have that, that's fine. Let's quickly check that code works. So code is Visual Studio Code as said, and let's just pretend that we want to edit a file here in the Linux home directory called foo. And as you see, if you call code for the first time, it installs this daemon I already mentioned on the Linux side. And now we have the Windows application, and you can edit the Linux file from Windows here. Let's put something in here. This is a test. Let's save it, close the editor, and you see we have edited this file on Linux from Windows. That's super handy. Therefore, code from my point of view makes complete sense. Okay, the display variable is still something we need to make sure we have. So let's get back to the script, and you see here is a way. There are millions of ways how to do it, but here is one way how we could do it. So we go and edit the startup file from fish, and first we need to make sure that we have this these directories created here. Okay, they're already created, even better. Then let's edit this file. As said, we can easily do that now with Visual Studio Code. And for now, at least, let's go for those 2 lines. As said, I like having exa as a ls replacement, so let's set this alias. And the other thing, and that's super important, you need to have that, is to set the display variable. The display variable needs to be set to the IP address of the Windows system, and that's not your public IP address. This is the WSL environment has its own network interface, so it has its own IP address. And the important thing is that the VM, the Linux side, needs to know this Windows WSL IP address. You can easily get that because you can find it in the resolve.conf on Linux. So this little grab and cut here does the trick. I saved it. Let's close everything. Let's open it again because it was in the startup script. And there we have it. That's great. And now we are almost there because we can now open a UI program. For example, the GNOME calculator. Let's open it, and there we go. I mean, as you see, if you open those UI programs, they often output some errors and warnings and so on. So that's something where you need to find your system. But I think that's still totally okay. Most importantly, you can open the GNOME terminal. I like the GNOME terminal way more than all the other terminals. From my point of view, this is really superior to all the others. But there is of course more. So we could, for example, start, oh, I wanted to start Chromium. Chromium, there we go. And here we have it. And I mean, this is super important because this is the whole reason, that's the whole point why I did all this here, is that you can start the Linux applications, the Linux UI applications, and they look exactly as the Windows UI applications. Every application gets its own item here in the taskbar. You can copy and paste via the clipboard stuff between them. So working with this environment, I mean, I already said this is my development environment for Java, JavaScript, and so on. You can work with this. You have all the capabilities, all the possibilities from Linux, Bash, Fish, all the applications. But you're not limited to Linux. You can also use the Windows things. And I mean, Visual Studio Code, something obviously I installed here on the Windows side, that's of course available for Linux as well. But when it comes to enterprise software, Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all those different Skype for Business, I don't know, all those things which are not available on Linux, then you can still use all those Windows applications in parallel, really side by side, with Linux applications. So this setup gives you, from my point of view, the best of both worlds without too many drawbacks. I mean, obviously there are always drawbacks, but this is a working solution from my point of view. Okay, what else can I show you? I don't think there is too much. We have installed everything. I mean, you can install obviously more software. If you ever want to get sound enabled, within Linux, you can do that as well. I don't include this in this video. If you like it, maybe you can put a comment into the section below this video, and I can do another video. But for now, I would just like to say it is possible to also output the sound from the Linux side over to Windows and yeah, then give it to your speakers. But I think for now, that's it. That's a working WSL environment. As said, go back here to my GitHub page, to the WSL Debian setup page. Here you can find all the links. You can find the script which automatically does what we have done now manually. Here are a couple of things. You can also start from a UI side. I think we already looked at it. Here is something I'd still like to mention. You can change the Windows terminal setup in a way that it automatically changes the home directory, that it automatically starts Debian and not the PowerShell. But I mean, that's super simple. Just read it up here and do it. And also, of course, for the X11, we have started that manually. You can start that with a shortcut by creating a file with the X launch extension, putting this as content in it, and then you just need to click this file you've created here, and it automatically starts the X11 server without asking you all those questions every time. But that's it. I hope you liked the video, and see you later. Bye bye.